Hi, we're back on Education Forum, and today's guest is Dr. Michael Baltimore. And we were just talking about borderline personality disorders when we went to the break, and I think we need to pick up with that because we were just going into the definition a little more. And the thing that we were talking about at the break is the issue of empathy and relationships, and that's where we were when we went out. So
yeah, it's really important to understand that these relationships or in some ways just a dysfunctional relationship that is manifested through this pattern of closeness and distance that is beyond the norm. Coupled that with the lack of empathy that people who have this disorder show, or don't show, I guess I should say, because the normal person, sometimes if you get into a conflict, you look at the person's behavior, but you also look at your own behavior, and you kind of measure. Wait a minute, there's that natural empathy that I think we all have, and that's cut off in the disorder, and so therefore it's always external, as opposed to being internal, and an evaluation of self, if you will. The notion that we look at our own behavior and measure our behavior and measure the others, and then we kind of build our relationships based on that empathy notion. When it's missing, it's going to be very difficult for the people around this person to function, actually.
So then the person doesn't self-regulate that way then? Okay.
I think that's right, and I think what happens is you can talk about the wounds, either attachment wounds or early parts of their lives in childhood and adolescence, and a lot of theories point to those kind of things, or trauma that happened even later that help kind of define this, although it's a little difficult to kind of corral all of that information in. But nevertheless, what you see, what manifests itself is this impairment in interpersonal relationships and the lack of empathy, sometimes impulsivity, but certainly people around a personality disordered person are going to have difficulties, because a lot of times you may think it's your fault, it's not. You may feel bad and try to work through some things that are not yours. And then, as you mentioned, Greg, if they're in a position of power and authority, if they're a manager or a
team leader of some sort.
Team leader, in that way, they're going to have, with the lack of empathy, you can understand that the employees probably are going to feel more stressed. They're going to be stressed out, and that's there are going to be a lot of problems as a result of that, which I think manifests itself in feeling tense and stressed out, and maybe even decrease in productivity.
So then the person with the borderline personality disorder wouldn't even see that stress they've put on others because of that lack of empathy.
Almost by definition.
So the behavior would continue.
Exactly, or even any stress that their people might feel is a result of the people themselves.
That's right.
It's their own problem.
There are some theories to say that this person who has this type of disorder or trends toward this disorder actually feels a lot of chaos internally, and that it may be related to object relations theory. We don't have time to talk about that today, but this notion of really sort of an integrated personality. And what happens is the chaos within the person is best dealt with sometimes by getting the chaos outside of the person, which really means, and simply put, if the person has conflict outside of themselves between two people or others or the group or their employees, for example, then they're okay.
And they put
in other words, the chaos outside of the person helps to self-soothe, if you will, and helps that person be okay. So there's a tendency to see a lot of conflict in organizations around these personality disorders, and it has a tremendous and a negative impact on the people in the workplace.
So because of this personality disorder and because of their role, they're putting all that stress on the people that are working for them, and this just continues. This confusion continues and this stress continues. And the person feels better
Yes,
and continues this.
And by definition, they're also isolating themselves so that they may be in their office, they're not really communicating with others in the company or the business or an institution. So that there's not clear communication and there's not honest and clear communication. And therefore, the receiver of all this stress, the employees themselves and the team themselves, I mean, their productivity is going to go down. The morale within the organization, the morale is going to be low. There's going to be a lot of problems as a result of that, the lack of teamwork. Because we also know that the employees are under a lot of stress now. If you look at the statistics out there now, the American Psychological Association has done has a fact sheet on a lot of these figures. But we all feel overworked. We're all working more hours. We all feel stress that has increased over the recent years. There are financial issues, there are budget cuts and the economy and so forth. So there are higher levels of stress in a work organization anyway.
Okay.
But add this component to it, and what you've got is low morale, low productivity, and people who may even leave their job, look for other jobs as a result of that.
I was just going to say, I can see how that could lead to losing some of your best people, people having other options.
They don't need it. They don't need it.
Well, there are a lot of ways that people individually deal with this kind of issue when they're with a manager who's has a borderline personality disorder or personality disorder, and so there's all kinds of ways to do it. People retreat, you know, people will avoid those kind of things. You know, and some of the statistics actually say there's been an increase in appointments with doctors and medical appointments due to this, and there's a big percentage of those that are stress related to this kind of thing.
Oh gosh, you can see that.
So it's a big problem, and I'm hoping that people will become more aware of mental health in general in the workplace, but also mental illness in the workplace, so that we can begin to resolve some of these issues, because it's not the situation, it's the person.
Well,
and that is a very different view that you often hear and see.
Well, and then let me ask you this, why aren't people aware of that? Don't we look at others as having mental illness or personality disorders? We just don't have that awareness?
You've seen the cartoon at one point where when you're looking at self-help books, and all the books are gone on about dealing with other people, but the dealing with yourself, there's a big shelf of those. We don't often look at ourselves in some of this, but I just don't think we've had the education. I don't think we've had exposure and awareness to the various categories of mental illness. When you say mental health, you think of anxiety, you think of depression, you think of schizophrenia, the more severe mental illnesses. And these are actually functioning people in your organization who are really connected with the problems that are going on in organizations and the decisions that are made and the impact on the actual employee.
Well, you know, and I would suggest that mental health in general is something in our culture we don't discuss. You know, we don't discuss it in the workplace. I think it's a direct reflection of our culture. Mental illness is something, as you said, we don't know much about, and a major reason for that is we don't talk about it.
Well, and we always talk about the severe cases.
That's right.
But we don't talk about this.
And there's a huge stigma around mental illness, having a mental illness. There's huge stigma.
It is huge, and it is a stigma. And if you look at, we were talking yesterday, just some of us, about all the negative news that's on our media. When you turn the news on, it's a tragedy, another tragedy, and another tragedy. And a lot of times when those things occur, the emphasis on mental health never shows up. When someone does a terrible act that's out there and it comes up in the media and we get to see it and we go, well, let's talk about guns, let's talk about drugs, let's talk about anything else but mental health. Because actually, from my point of view, that may be ground zero for a lot of the problems that manifest themselves through this. Now, certainly substance abuse and alcohol and substance abuse, all of those things are factors, but there's also more to the story. And so we need more education and awareness on mental issues that affect the workplace and affect our lives. And also, if we know more about it, actually may be able to move toward some sort of prevention and some help for people who are doing this. As we talked about earlier, though, it's often difficult if a person's in a position of power. You don't go to your boss and say, "Hey,
man,
right?
You're making it really hard on me, and I think it has to do with you."
Right,
it's
right,
not me.
right. And you see, if that symptom list there, they're not going to accept that at all. It's going to be your problem. And so this is a very difficult type of issue, and I think the organization overall really needs to, even the large organizations, and some of these are the World Health Organization and some of the other in the U.S. organizations are reaching out to companies and others to try to make a difference and try to get this awareness up so that people will be more informed and then can respond. It may not be your fault, turns out.
Now, some of the characteristics of this personality disorder, doesn't that make it so people will move up in the organization? I mean, those seem to be some of the characteristics that they're looking for.
Well, there are, yes, in that leadership style. If you're talking about a person who is decisive and makes those tough
they don't
decisions,
let feelings get in the way. And
feelings are not, and empathy is not an important thing. There's been this downplay in the media of empathy.
Yes.
Empathy's gotten a black eye over the years, and I really have a problem with that.
Yeah.
Because this is defined as seeing something from another person's point of view.
Yeah.
It's simply put.
That's right.
And when you're doing that, it opens the door for more collaboration, more understanding, a better problem solving, and you name it. So, yeah, that's right. And we have sort of pushed that notion of the tough decision making, whether it's a man or a woman,
that's right,
moving up in an organization. But on the other hand, if you look at things like servant leadership, if you look at these really good models of how a person leads an organization, these are people who care about others.
Right.
They have the empathy and the ability to empathize with others, and they can respond in a positive way. They can support and encourage their employees. They can build teams.
Right.
And the bottom line is, it increases the bottom line. It is it actually increases productivity, and membership in this team is a better way to run your business, whether it's an academic institution or it's a business that's producing a product in some ways. We've got to move in that direction.
So, but it sounds to me like you're talking the difference between short-term, quick, versus long-term investment, improving things for the long haul.
Right.
And someone with this personality disorder can get things done in the short term, but nobody wants to stay and be with them later.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And because of that lack of team building and that lack of feeling.
Oh, absolutely. And so those are the kinds of things that the organization as a whole has to decide. You know, it may be that these symptoms that we've listed earlier in the show up in the organization somewhere that everybody begins to get a picture that there's a problem.
Right.
Now, on the other hand, the person may be just out of under the out of the awareness or the lens, and can manage and can maintain these kinds of difficult problems and dealing with others, and not have a major issue that causes eyes to see this, and there's some action that's taking place at a higher level on the organization. So sometimes it is a very long, to your point, it's a long process.
Right.
When there is not a major trauma or problem that comes to light.
So if it doesn't come to a head, what can employees do if this is their leader, if this is their manager?
Well, I think the notion of building a team is still important. The notion of communicating with others and sharing the stories and working together and finding the people who you can work with, and be productive and build and create things and be innovative. And those are the ways that some people have been able to kind of overcome this. We talked earlier about just avoidance. That's probably not a really good strategy.
It's not the best
for dealing with people in management who have these kind of things. But overall, I think what you have to do is you have to speak out. I think you have to increase the awareness within the organization.
Okay.
I mean, what we're doing here today on Education Forum is in fact, one of the things on the list is we're just sharing information with others about
Getting
this.
It out.
And you know, we've just touched just the surface of this problem, because I talked particularly in today's show about the borderline personality.
Yes.
But they're bipolar, histrionic, narcissistic, on and on of these disorders that people have in the workplace, and we don't know that's going on.
No,
we feel the impact of
it,
but we can't explain why it's going on and what's happening with it. So I really come back to awareness about this. Let's talk about it some more.
Sure.
And then at working together with folks to sort of overcome the downside of this, and not blame yourself. I think that's a good point, if I will, if I mention it, because if you have empathy, as we were talking about earlier, you kind of weigh the situation back and forth and look at where does this originate and how it happens, and not blaming yourself, but actually seeing this in a context within the situation that you're working, and not taking that blame when you didn't do something, and then kind of going on.
Which is, for me, is really easy, because most of the problems that occur in my world are the result of other people.
You know, I'm thinking next week we're going to talk about the narcissistic personality disorder. And
I would love to, because I know a lot of people.
I know you. All right, that's a joke right there.
Yeah, but you know, what you're saying is so important, and I really wish we could talk about those other personality disorders. We're running out of time with today's show, so we got to have you back. And we got to talk about the histrionic personality disorder and the bipolar disorder, and because I think this is good information we have to get out, because I think people really need to understand it's not them, and it's hurting them when they're not seeing that.
Nice of you to say that, and I'd be happy to come back and talk about these. I think some of this stuff really helps us understand human behavior at a different level, and when we're able to do that, we understand, and then we can find ways to kind of work out and have better and healthier relationships in our workplace.
Well, and that lack of awareness of others is big.
It is a big.
Well, I'd like to thank you, Mike, for coming on today and talking about this. I think this was a great topic. I'm afraid we could have gone on for hours.
I know.
And Greg, I'd like to thank you again. It was a good show today.
Pleasure as always.
And I'd like to thank you for watching Education Forum. I'm Jeff Conklin.